Welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. I'm excited to have for our guest for this episode, Dr. Debbye Turner Bell, who is a distinguished leadership thought leader, network news journalist, former Miss America, and best-selling author of the book Courageous Faith, A Lifelong Pursuit of Faith Over Fear. Join us as we explore Debbie's inspiring journey from her upbringing in a single-parent household in Arkansas to capturing the Miss America title. Her story is a testament to the resilience and unwavering faith that she had in the face of adversity. Get ready for insights that will empower you to tackle your challenges head on. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. Welcome to the program again, Debbie.
Thank you so much, Charles. It's my pleasure to be here.
So I like to start each episode with just kind of, why you wrote the book. And I love how you state in the book that people wanted to know how they could achieve impossible dreams or conquer their impossible challenges and realize success, especially after a setback. And they also wanted to know which areas of their life could trip them up and which strategies might give them a winning edge. And you state this book is an answer to that question.
Yes, I have been telling my story for many years as a speaker. Back in the day, we were called motivational speakers. And I always talked about the hardships and the difficulties that I went through and challenges and odds that I had to overcome because I really wanted to inspire people and motivate people to understand that life is not always fair. It's not always easy. Sometimes it's downright tragic. But if we don't give up, if we commit ourselves to finding out what our divinely given purpose is and then stick to it, I'm a living witness that you can make it to your dreams, that dreams do come true, and we can achieve excellence. And so as I was telling my story around the country, both as Miss America and even for the years immediately afterwards, so many people say, you got to write a book, you got to write a book. And even that process took me a long time because I felt confident in my oratory skills. I didn't have much confidence at all in my writing skills. So I made excuses and I put it off, and then life happened. All these things sort of got in the way. And then finally, one day, I just, decided, you know what? I want to leave everything on the field. When I leave this life and go see my maker, I want to make sure that I'm able to say I did everything you put me on this earth to do. And so writing this book was a part of it. And so the creation of the book is as much a part of my story as the stories in the book. But I hope people come away inspired and come away motivated to dust themselves off, to not take failure as the end of the road, but sometimes a detour or a delay, and keep going until they hit those goals.
Well, let's talk about failure because that's one of the first chapters of the book. And every great life is filled with failures, yours included. And I love what you say in the book too, is that in your pursuit of success, never take for granted the experiences you gain from things that might not be so highly regarded or valued at the time. Don't despise small beginnings. Because for you, it really started with Elizabeth Howard, your choir director at your church, kind of looking for opportunities for African American girls to develop self-esteem and confidence. And so she started a local chapter of a national pageant organization.
That's absolutely right. And now I know for sure you read the book because that's a minute little detail. But yeah, we never know what will be the foundation upon which our true success and purpose will be built. And then as you mentioned, there was a community, she was a community leader and the choir director at my church. And she was always looking for things for young people in the community to do to keep us out of trouble. And she decided to start this pageant. It was called the Miss Black Teenage World pageant. And she picked that one specifically because particularly at that time, this would have been in the late 70s, early 80s, there were very few women of color represented in the mainstream pageant systems. And she wanted the young Black girls in Jonesboro, Arkansas to feel just as beautiful, just as valuable, to recognize their talent and potential just as much as anybody else. And so she started a local chapter, recruited all the girls of color in her world, which were part of our church and community center and that kind of thing, to be in it. And she was more interested in teaching us poise and grace, and learning how to speak with confidence and authority, and how to set goals, those kinds of things. She was as interested in that as she was, one of the girls ending up wearing a crown and winning the title. So that's how I got involved. We called her Sister Liz, and I loved Sister Liz. She was one of those influences in my life that whatever she asked me to do, I was going to do it, because she was bigger than life, and she loved well. So when she said, "Hey girls, this is what we're going to do," I was like, "Okay, I'll do it." I had no experience in pageants. I had no aspiration in pageants, but I did it because Sister Liz asked. And it was through that process that seemed to be almost coincidental, something that wasn't going to lead to anything. It was by that time I knew I wanted to be a veterinarian. I'm a science geek. So this was just something fun to do that Sister Liz asked me to do. Turned out to be the foundation upon which I built my experience and trajectory that led me to Miss America. So to get to the nut of the question that you asked, don't discount any experience in life, because you never know what lessons learned, even those small incidental things, might be essential and pivotal to where you're going in life. I had no idea when I was in that pageant that it was going to lead to anything else. I didn't even win the thing, but it was the beginning of a great experience, a life-changing experience.
And like you said, your real goal was to become a veterinarian and to win scholarships. So that's why you first entered into these. That's why, many people may not know this, but the largest scholarship granting organization at that time was Miss America for women. So your real goal was to get those scholarships, to get to school and to get into veterinary school and become a veterinarian, not necessarily to live that pageant life and or have aspirations since you were real little in being Miss America.
Yeah, I jokingly say, I was not Miss Cabbage Patch and, misunderstood, misbehaved, none of that. I didn't grow up in that kind of environment. And I wasn't a tomboy, but I wasn't that girly either. Like, I didn't play in my mother's makeup. I never like wore her high heels that I can remember around the house. I always loved animals. I always loved trying to figure out how things worked. Came to find out later that was what science is. And so the marriage of those two was veterinary medicine. And I knew from a fairly young age that that's what I wanted to pursue as an education. So when I found out about after the Miss Black Teenage World pageant, that led to me being in a high school pageant called the Jonesboro High School Valentine's Sweetheart pageant. And I really just did it because I had the experience and I had the wardrobe for Miss Black Teenage World. And I was like, why not? It was fun. I didn't mind doing it. And so I did that one. That led to the Junior Miss pageant, which was more of a scholastic program for high school juniors and seniors, and that led to being recruited to being in the Miss America pageant. And as I said before, I wasn't a pageant girl. I wasn't even that frou-frou. I didn't know how to do my makeup. I walked, like a cow in high heels. So I wasn't good at any of that. But the lady who was the director of the Miss Jonesboro pageant, which is a preliminary in the Miss America system, was trying to get me to be in the pageant. She was trying to get girls to be in. And I was very non-committal. I'm like, I don't know. I'll think about it. No, not really. And she just kept trying. And she finally said, the Miss America system is the largest source of scholarship for women in the world. If you win a local pageant, you go to state. If you win state, you go to Miss America, where you can win tens of thousands of dollars in scholarship money. And that's all it took. I mean, I jokingly said, dollar signs appeared in my eyes. My ponytail stood up. I was like, I'll do it. Where do I sign up? Because I was growing up in a single parent, lower middle class home. We were not destitute. I had food and housing and decent clothes to wear, but we didn't have any extras. And I knew for sure my family could not pay for the veterinary education that I wanted. And so I was going to have to get scholarships, grants, loans, work several jobs in order to pay for that education. So when she mentioned that, I jumped right on it because I saw it as a means to an end. This can help me become a veterinarian. And so for the first several years that I competed, that was my sole motivating force, was just to win enough little stuff to gain some scholarship money that I could bank to prepare me for my education.
Great story. Let's talk a little bit about your family and your parents. Your dad was a commissioned officer in the United States Army, did 3 tours in Vietnam. You moved quite a bit when you were young. Your parents got divorced, unfortunately, when you were around 5 years old. And I love the way you describe your mother, Gussie Lee Jones. Your mother was absolutely gorgeous, a statuesque 5'10" individual, built like a proverbial brick house, but she was also kind and compassionate and quick to go out of her way to help others.
Yes, my mother was an incredible woman. She's now gone on to be with the Lord. She died many, many years ago now. But she lived long enough to see me be crowned Miss America and lived a couple of years after that. But she was the type of person I like to say, if I could just be half the woman she was, then I'd consider my life a success. She was that woman that you would meet in a store. She'd be a total stranger to you. And within 10 minutes, you would have told her your deepest, darkest secrets in your whole life story. And if you needed help, she would have taken clothing off her own back, dug it in her purse that was nearly empty anyway, and given you what she had to help you. She was a woman of prayer and of faith. I spent half my childhood pouting in stores because she would get to know someone and all of a sudden they'd start praying together. And my mother did not pray short prayers. So I'd be somewhere mad and hungry, and she would be counseling someone. She was a counselor by profession, but also a minister of the gospel. And she was never too busy for anyone that needed help. And she was the kind of person that noticed those people. And so I grew up helping older people in our community, cleaning their bathrooms, clipping their toenails, mowing their lawns, because my mother made us do that. We would have to help on holidays. We would have a huge meal and then fix plates and take them to the sick and the shut in and the disenfranchised to make sure they had a meal. And she was just that kind of woman. I'll also say this about her: she was a hard taskmaster. To everybody else, she was sweet Miss Gussie. But my mom had very high standards for my older sister and me, and she expected and would accept nothing less than excellence from us. And I describe it this way as to epitomize how we were raised. I was paid for my A's. I was given $4 for every A that I made on my report card. However, for every B that I made on my report card, two of those dollars was taken away. So that was the standard in the Gussie Turner household. But I appreciate that now because it instilled in me a work ethic and a standard for myself that helped me and continues to help me in my life. But she really was just a phenomenal, phenomenal woman.
And as your mother grew spiritually, so did you, because she taught you the importance really of spiritual growth through the example that she gave, that when she started her faith, and like you said, when facing anything, she prayed. And I think a lot of people have this wrong because I hear this a lot. Well, I guess there's nothing else we can do now but pray. Why wait till the end?
That's right. That's we prayed first, and we prayed about everything. The Bible says that we can ask anything in the name of Jesus, and we doubt not in our heart we will receive it. And my mother believed the Bible. She took God at his word according to what was in the Bible. And so the scriptures also say that God is interested in the intricate details of our life. So she took every detail to him. That was what was modeled before me and taught us to do that. From praying about what outfit to wear at an important event at school to, I remember, and I tell this story in the book, I didn't have what I thought was a best friend. And I was struggling, socially with connecting with kids my age. And I remember sort of crying on my mother's shoulder saying, I don't have a best friend. And my mother, I just really wanted sympathy from her. And I wanted her maybe to, fix me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or something. But what she said was, well, pray about it. Ask God to give you a best friend. And at the time, I was a little annoyed by that answer, because I wanted commiseration and affirmation and that peanut butter jelly sandwich. But I did take her at her word and I did pray about it. And it was a simple prayer: God, send me a best friend. That following school year, a new family moved to Jonesboro. And I became friends with all of the girls in the family, but one became my very best friend. And we were close friends for years and years and years. So that was probably one of my first experiences where I prayed for something, not my mom praying on my behalf, but where I prayed for something. And as far as I'm concerned, God did it. So my experience was God was real, that he cares. And if you pray and ask him, he's not Santa Claus. He's not going to give us everything that we ask for, but he does care about what we care about. And that became, a foundation for the faith that I still live out today in my life.
Let's fast forward again. Now you're toward the end of high school. Like you said, you just won the Jonesboro High School Sweetheart Pageant, partly because of your presence on stage, because you like being on stage. You found that from the very first pageant that you developed this. And then, like you stated, one of the judges, Maxine Hahn, noticed you, extended the invite to the Miss Jonesboro competition. A lot of our listeners connect with this is that most of us would like God to shout out from the heavens, but God almost never tells us everything we want to know when we want to know it. He wants us to learn to respond to his voice and trust him completely. So there was no voice from God saying that you were going to be Miss America, but he did provide you Maxine.
He absolutely did. And I really do believe that, sometimes I do believe God can speak to us, and he can speak to us in a variety of ways. And it's often that still quiet voice, in our heart and our spirit. But he can also send people and circumstances that speak what he wants us to know. And so for me, the road to the Miss America pageant started with Maxine Hahn, who was a local entrepreneur. She owned a cosmetics store in Jonesboro called Merle Norman. And if you're old enough and from the South, you might recognize that. But she was also the director of the Miss Jonesboro pageant. And she's the one who recruited me to be in the Miss Jonesboro pageant, the preliminary in the Miss America system. And again, I thought nothing of it. I didn't think that, my life was going to change as a result of being in it. I did enter the pageant after she told me about the scholarship. I did my very best. I think because I had no expectations, I just kind of went in and I was myself. And apparently that was enough to impress the judges. I did not win, but I was told I had great potential. And so in my little mind, I think I was 16 or 17 at the time, potential meant when I tried the next time I was going to win in my head. So I entered another local. Actually, I was told that I was a little young. I was 16. So to get older, come back and try it again. So I came back at 18, entered the Miss Jonesboro pageant again, and again did not win. And then entered another pageant. And finally, on the third pageant, I won a local. And that took me to the Miss Arkansas pageant for the very first time. But again, it was simply a matter of walking through doors that opened and not even necessarily understanding they were doors that were opening that were going to lead to somewhere significant. But I make that point to say that we have to be open sometimes to walk through doors for opportunities that might scare us or might make us feel uncomfortable, because we never know what lessons we learn, even if we fail at that opportunity, that will help us with succeeding down the road. We might get to this. You already mentioned my very first chapter in the book is titled Failure. And that was very intentional, because I believe almost all success, if not all success, is built on a foundation of failures, of trying and stumbling, trying and falling. We know that old saying, it's a very old saying, if at first you don't succeed, try again. And that's fine. However, I believe a more effective way to approach it is, if at first you don't succeed, learn, improve, and then try again, because that gets you closer to where you want to go. So I've talked myself down a rabbit trail, but yes, Maxine Hahn was an instrument of God, I believe, to set me on the course for what God had for me later in life.
When you were 19 was the first time that you competed in Miss Arkansas. You didn't win. You were not as mature and sophisticated. So you decided, I'm going to take 2 years off. You went, enrolled into veterinary school. You tried Miss Arkansas two more times. 21, you went, you got first runner up, right? The
Right?
very next year, you were expected to win it because the first runner up, you were the proverbial favorite. You thought it was your destiny to win this. Everything was in alignment. Your mother was praying for you. You said a prayer before each time it was announced. And that was, it seems like one of the lowest points in your life up to that point, when that third time competing, you got first runner up again.
Yeah, so I'll put a little color on what you just described, and you did it accurately. First time I was in the Miss Arkansas pageant, I made the top 10, but I didn't make a finalist place. But as I was told, again, because I was 19 and so young, that I had all this potential. And by now I'm beginning to not like potential, because to me it seems like a code for, you're kind of good, but you're not going to win. But I had this potential, again, a little too young and to come back again because I was competing at that time against women who were 23, 24, even up to 26, because the age limit was 17 to 26. And so, I took them at their word. That was fine. I finished undergrad and started veterinary school, won another local, I think after losing a local, and then went back to Miss Arkansas a second time, and I got first runner up. And I was told that if I came back and I tried again, I would likely win because at that time, there was this ongoing tradition that the returning first runner up, which is second place, would come back and win. It happened 4 years in a row. Now, what's important to say at this point in the story is as I'm learning and growing in my pageant ability and acumen, if you will, I'm also growing spiritually and in my relationship with God. So with each try, I am releasing more of myself and what I think I want out of this. And I'm asking God for more of what his will and his purpose is. So by the time I got to Miss Arkansas for the second time and got first runner up, I knew for sure I was going to try again. I prayed about it this time, but the prayer was less about God, here's my idea and I want you to bless my idea. The prayer was, God, what is your purpose? That's what I want. And I believed in my heart that it was the purpose of, not the purpose of my life, but part of his purpose for my life was to try this again and that I would win. And so I spent that year doing school and improving. I'm a marimba player and, improving in my marimba skills and all those other things that it takes to compete in the pageant. So when I came back, not only was I the returning first runner up, but I believe that this was what God wanted me to do. And that might sound strange to a lot of people. And I get it. No offense to anyone, but this was, my lived experience. And so when I got there, I was the odds-on favorite to win. Every time I walked out on stage, the crowd would cheer. I got a lot of the media attention. I was the odds-on favorite. So on the final night, it's time for the top 10 finalists to compete in all the categories, and then the winner is chosen. I made top 10. I competed as well as I could have. Nothing, went wrong. I didn't miss any notes or none that people could notice. I didn't trip and fall. Nothing fell out. I thought, this is it. I've done it. And get to the end of the night and, they dramatize it and make it all full of suspense and begin to announce the runners up. And I developed a new little system. And instead of praying, God, let me win, every time they were doing the build up to the next runner up, I would silently pray, your will be done. And they called the name of the fourth runner up and it wasn't me. And so inside I was like, phew, thank God. And they, we did that with the third runner up. God, your will be done. It was not me. Second runner up. God, your will be done. It was not me. So now they get to the first runner up, which again is second place, and the winner. Those are the two that yet have to be called. Now, I was first runner up the year before at Miss Arkansas. And believe it or not, I've skipped over a lot of my story, which is all in the book, but I had been first runner up several times in other pageants. I'm not a fan of first runner up. I'd almost rather lose it than get first runner up because you get the same thing, nothing. So when it got to first runner up, I said, and I meant it from my heart, God, your will be done. I didn't want that, but your will be done. And, they do the big, if, this position is very important because in the event that Miss Arkansas can't fulfill her duties, the first runner-up steps, does all of that, and the drum is rolling and people are, murmuring about it. And they finally say, and your first runner-up is, and they said, Miss Northeast Arkansas, Debbye Turner. And I was crushed. I was crestfallen. And the audience audibly gasped. You could hear people go, because everyone thought I was going to win, with perhaps the notable exception of the mother of the girl who actually did win. And so I got what I call the chip tray. It was a silver tray and my little flowers, and they hustled the first runner up off the stage pretty quickly so that, all the adulation can go to the winner. And I stood there and I could not understand what just happened. They called the name of the winner, Patty Jo Thorne, a lovely lady, extraordinarily talented opera singer. But I was devastated. And you have to read the book to get all the details, but I ended up in a puddle of my own tears in the fetal position in my hotel room, sobbing asking God, why did you make me do this? If I wasn't going to win, why did I even do this? And I remember laying there and I literally cried myself out, had no more tears. And I laid there, and I don't know if you've ever cried so hard that you can't cry anymore. But I was at that point, and there was a certain stillness and peace as I laid there on the floor in my hotel room. And in that quietness, I heard in my heart, Debbie, I'm faithful. Now get up. And I didn't know what that meant, but I believe that was God talking to me. So I got up and I washed the pageant makeup off my face and brushed all that, hairspray out of my hair. And I went downstairs to meet my family and have a meal. And I didn't know what was coming, but I knew it was not over because God is faithful. I ended up being in the Miss Missouri pageant because I was in veterinary school then. And maybe you're going to ask that next. But it took that quiet, still moment for me to gather myself and say, this is utterly devastating, catastrophic for me. And for some people who don't know pageants or don't like pageants, you might not understand why it would affect me that way. But I've literally given my whole life and my identity in some ways to this, pursuing this goal, and not making it in that fashion really was cataclysmic for me. But even in that moment, I knew I wasn't going to give up. I didn't know what that was going to look like, but I knew I wasn't going to give up.
When your faith was definitely tested during that time, and you kind of gave up on your dream, you were willing to quit until one of your mom's friends one Saturday morning said they had a vision with you with a crown, holding roses, walking on a stage, which kind of was part of that turnaround, right? That stated, well, if I can't compete, or if you don't want to compete in the Miss America again, I can now compete in the Miss Missouri. So why not give it another shot in 1989?
So yes, exactly. The lady who was praying and said, "I see you," with a white crown, a crown in your head. That came before the final time at Miss Arkansas. What introduced the opportunity or the option of taking a different path to the Miss America pageant was right there on stage. Right after I've lost Miss Arkansas. Back in those days, they would allow the parents and friends of each of the contestants who are on stage to come up on stage and greet them. And so my family came up on stage to greet me as the first runner up. And you would have thought that they were coming to view the dead. Everybody's face is long, it looks sad. My sister, who was like a community activist, she was mad because she thought that race was involved, and maybe it was. I was in Arkansas, by the way. But my mother was the last person to come give me a hug. And as she was hugging me, she whispered in my ear, "I'm so proud of you." Actually, she said, "I'm so pleased for you." She rarely said proud because the Bible said pride comes before a fall. But she goes, "I'm so pleased." And she said, there's always Missouri. So she planted that seed right away. And because I was in veterinary school at the University of Missouri, I was eligible to be in the Missouri pageant system, in the Miss America system. And so it took some time and prayer because I wasn't sure I wanted to go through that emotionally or all the work it takes to do it. And I'm in veterinary school, which was quite rigorous all by itself. But finally, ultimately decided, yep, I believe that God has something for me in this. And so the following year, I competed in a Missouri local and I won that. That was Miss Columbia. That took me to the Miss Missouri pageant. And even though it was my first shot at the Miss Missouri title, it was really my fourth try at the state level, counting those 3 tries in Arkansas. I won Miss Missouri, and that's what took me to Miss America.
The determination to get back up again and not to quit and fail, and the excellence that's required to compete in this competition, just for people that don't realize the time and all the things that go into it. The marimba, I mean, playing that instrument, you develop musical skills over a number of years, practice 3 hours a day, taking private lessons to sharpen your skills. There's a private job style interview that all contestants have to answer, right? And you had a 3 ring binder. You were having people give you mock trials or questions from family, friends, just to pepper you with questions. So you were aware of all the current issues, social issues, and you were well versed on that. And then your ballet teacher when you were young said you walk like a goat. So What did you do? You went to your unfinished basement, and for hours a day, you practiced walking in the basement with a full-length mirror. I mean, it took incredible determination, discipline, and just drive to get you to this point.
Yeah, it was a lot of work. It was all those things that you've just said and more. In those days, I spent hours watching newscasts and reading newspapers and news periodicals because a large part of the competition for the Miss America pageant, making it different than many of the other pageants that are out there, was, as you mentioned, this private. And back then, it was, I believe, a 12 or 15-minute private interview. It's the hardest, most rigorous interview I've ever experienced, where the judges ask all kinds of questions, not only about our goals and aspirations in life, but about current events and social issues and what we thought about them. And so I had to know what was happening in the world to have an opinion on them. And just the kind of personality that I had and still have, I would document all that in this ring binder and had sections, for the current news and social events and what affects youth and foreign affairs and all of these. And I would, keep notes on what was happening. And then because I was in the Miss Arkansas system, and it was true for Miss Missouri as well, because Miss Arkansas spent her year traveling around the state being an ambassador of goodwill. I had to know things about Arkansas, the state bird, the state flower, who the elected officials were, and what the industries and the crops of Arkansas and all of that stuff. Had to learn all of that, so it was quite rigorous. And the judges, particularly once we got to the Miss America pageant, they were looking for a woman who was comfortable enough in her own skin to just be herself and to be authentic, but could stand up to the harsh glare of the American free press. So they asked embarrassing questions, and imposing questions and questions to trip us up to see if we could handle an interview from a news reporter or from a magazine correspondent. And so it was quite rigorous and quite challenging. And they wanted to try to purposely ruffle our feathers and get us flustered to see if we could stay on our game and remain poised. So yeah, it was a lot of work. And as you mentioned, I would ask local community leaders to come and do mock interviews, and they would videotape them, and they would fire these questions. What do you think about relations with, back in those days it was the Cold War with the USSR, and communist China, which of course is still communist. And what do you think about this? And how do you address the issues of young people? And I've always been very outspoken about my faith, and I would get questions like, are you a virgin? And really intrusive questions, because a news reporter would ask those type of questions and they wanted to know, could you handle it? So I would sit through these mock interviews, and then we would watch the videotape. And then the people who volunteer to do the mock interviews would then critique me and pick me apart. This was a good answer. You didn't think through this answer. You lost your concentration on that. You need to sit up straight. You used your hands too much. You didn't use them enough. Your facial expression was this or that. I mean, it was like the tiniest details. And then we'd do it again to see if I improved based on the feedback that they gave me. So yeah, it was quite a process to prepare.
And this, I mean, happened over a course of years. I mean, all this, patience, perseverance, discipline, practice got you in 1989 to the Miss America pageant. And at that time, it was the second highest viewed television program in the country behind the Super Bowl. It was in the height of its popularity during that time. And a lot of the competition occurred before the televised part of it happened, where they really knew who the top 10 were going to be before it even aired. So it was a grueling week leading up to the televised portion of that program, which I'm sure drained you during that time. You performed better in certain areas than you thought you did, and didn't do as well in other areas, but you made it into the top 10. And what were your thoughts kind of going through your mind when you're on the stage?
Yes, back in those days, it's a little different now. But this was 30 years ago, or 35 really. We would arrive in Atlantic City, which is where the Miss America pageant was founded and was held for, 70 some years, 3 weeks before the final telecast. So we'd been there a long time. And back in those days, there were these big, elaborate stage productions. So we would immediately go into rehearsals, learning songs and dance steps and choreography and all of that. And there was a lot of media attention. So we, would be doing interviews, that kind of stuff. And then the week of the final telecast, the competition began. And it began with what's known as preliminaries. And there, at that time, were 51 contestants representing the 50 states in the District of Columbia. And they divided us into 3 groups. And so there were 3 nights of preliminaries. And each night, one group would compete in one area of competition. So there were 4 areas. The first is the private interview, which is held even before the stage competition starts. And then when the stage competition starts, we would each compete in swimsuit, talent, and what was called then evening gown. And you do one of those, each one of those nights. At the end of that 3rd night, the 10 girls that had the 10 highest scores were announced live on television, on that live telecast. And they competed, those 10, in all 3 of those areas of competition live on television, and a winner was selected from there. So we didn't know going into the telecast who was going to be in what was known as the top 10. And I was the next to the last person called. So they kept calling names, and I'm like, all right, God, I think I did well this week. All right, God. And finally, I was the 9th person called. And when I made top 10, we had a quick change because swimsuit was the first competition after a commercial break. And as I was getting ready, I remember saying to God, I've done everything that I can do. I put the work in, I prepared, I prayed, I fasted, I listened to advice. Now, God, it's totally up to you. I'm going to go out there and do what I've come prepared to do, but the results are up to you. And I walked out on stage that first time as a top 10 semifinalist and just had fun. I just had fun. I smiled, I winked at the people, I did the turns as I'd practiced. And for those many years practicing in my unfinished basement at home, trying to learn how to walk gracefully in 4 and 5-inch heels. But I just had a ball. And I didn't have time to think about how high the stakes were or how nerve-wracking it was. Just went out there and did what I was prepared to do. And just before the talent competition, because I was the 8th person called, I had a little time to wait before it was my turn. And I was sitting backstage, as you referenced, and they were in the commercial break before my competition. And I'm just sitting there, and in my head, I'm going through my song. I played a medley of 3 different songs, the first one being Flight of the Bumblebee. And I was a pretty good percussionist back then and played that super fast, 220 beats per minute. So I'm warming up my muscles and my arms so that I could play that fast without being able to warm up on my marimba. And so one of the backstage hands comes up, and I guess he thinks I'm nervous. And I probably did have some, tension there. And so he just strikes up conversation, and turns out he was a rapper. He was a boxer too, but he also loved rap. And I'm like, oh, I know a rap. I can do a rap. So he did a little bit of his rap, and I did a little bit of my rap. And it was great. It was a great distraction before I had to go out and play the marimba. And unbeknownst to me, he tipped someone off in the media after I won that I know how to do a rap. And so at my very first press conference after winning the Miss America title, a reporter asked about it and said, hey, can you do some of your rap? And that became a thing. And during that year, I spoke to hundreds of thousands of students at schools, and they would always ask me to do that doggone rap. And they thought it was novel that a Miss America knew how to rap.
Well, take me to that moment when you're one of the 2 finalists now. Now it's you and Miss Maryland, right? And now it's Gary. He says the winner of the $20,000 scholarship and first runner-up is Miss Maryland. What are the thoughts going through your mind? I loved how you said, thank you to God right from the start, but kind of describe that feeling. What were you experiencing when the realization set in?
Yes. So there's a pageant etiquette, particularly in those days. When someone wins a place, you congratulate her. And so when Gary Collins said, and your first runner up is Virginia Chaw, Miss Maryland, I turned to hug her and just instinctively congratulate her on this great honor. She's first runner-up to Miss America. And it was in the midst of that hug that I realized, you dummy, that means you won. And so when you watch the tape, if you've ever seen it, the hug changes. Because at that moment I realized, oh shoot, that means I win. And then it becomes a bear hug. And it was less about congratulating her and celebrating for myself, but it was just a feeling of sheer elation. I was ecstatic. I was relieved. I was grateful. Because even in that moment, I knew it didn't have to be me. I was not the most talented woman on stage that night. I wasn't the most articulate. I wasn't the most beautiful. I just happened to be the one that the judges picked that night. And I believe there was divine intervention involved in that. And I knew that right away. So as soon as I finally let go of Virginia, hugging her, the first thing I did was I raised my hands to the sky and I thanked the Lord, because I knew it was because of his grace and favor that I was standing there. This little country girl from Jonesboro, Arkansas, having grown up in a single parent, lower middle class home, told that I would never make it to that stage, that I wasn't the right type, that I didn't have blonde hair and blue eyes, that I was not Caucasian. This was 5 years after Vanessa Williams had been Miss America. She had to give up her title because of a scandal that she experienced. And one naysayer said, they're not going to never let another Black girl be Miss America. Yet here I stood and I was so grateful. And so I wouldn't dare start that experience off without thanking the one that got me there, and that was God. The second thing I did after I lifted my hands and said, thank you, Jesus, I did a thumbs up. And that was to acknowledge my mom, because we had this little system between us. And I always gave a thumbs up when I won so that she would know that I knew I couldn't be there without her, that she deserved that as much as I did. And so I gave that thumbs up for my mom, because in my mind, she became Miss America that night as well. And as it turned out, she thought so too. I found out later, when she went back home to Jonesboro, she was signing autographs. Gussie Turner, Miss America's mom. It was a neat moment. It's hard to describe, but it was, I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.